Alys Watson Brown is political commentator and contributor to Young Voices UK. Good morning, Alys.
Good morning, Callum.
Lovely to have you on this morning. Right, shall we start with the front page of the Times then? The PM calling in the military to stem the flow of migrants. Now, part of this feels like perhaps not all that new, but then when we read into the detail of the story, it's actually one of Boris Johnson's policies that he's throwing around this week to try and get his premiership back on track. Is this the sort of populist policy that is going to save his bacon in Operation Red Meat?
It's certainly a populist policy, not only to appeal to conservative voters, traditional conservative voters, but also the Labour Red Wall voters who voted for him in 2019. Whether it will save his bacon is another question. I mean, is it enough? The voters he is appealing to are extremely sceptical. I mean, many conservative commentators have publicly defected from the Conservative Party. For example, Alison Pearson, Toby Young, two new populist parties have started under his COVID premiership. One of them was sort of reformed UKIP Brexit party to attack migration. But if you look at the figures, more than 550 migrants have already crossed the channel in small boats this year. And I think what he's doing is important for the people who voted for him, but people have already made their opinion on Partygate. And they don't need a report or new policies to change that. So I think only time will tell.
It's interesting, isn't it, about the report, the new policies, and as you say, people making up their minds already. I just wonder then, you know, with all of these policies that are being thrown around this week, the BBC licence fee abolishment, the abolition of the BBC licence fee, I should say, in 2027 is one of those that's being thrown around as well. And I just wonder, there's a whole list of them, frankly. If they're not going to work, are the policies ever going to become reality? I'm trying to understand the strategy here, I suppose.
No, I agree. It's difficult to think. He seems to know exactly what the voters want, and he seems to be willing to give everything at the same time, which as a continued bid for support, which kind of makes people a bit more suspicious. It's like, well, why wouldn't you do this before? If you can do this now when Omicron is still supposedly pervasive, why couldn't you do this before? It's certainly strategy. He's, especially with the parties, the voters who are defecting, they're not only using the parties as a weapon against the PM, but a further fuel to support their lockdown skeptic argument. And I think by outlining policies that aren't related to COVID, the Prime Minister is firstly giving them something else to talk about, but can also be seen as a signal that he wants to get back to implementing the Brexit Britain agenda that his voters had hoped, that perhaps that maybe he was caught up in the whole COVID palaver and he still has that libertarian streak that people voted for in 2019. Well,
indeed, one of the things as part of Operation Red Meat is the idea that COVID restrictions could be lifted basically entirely on the 26th of January. Now, without wishing to sort of preempt anything here, if that is one of the policies, and he's choosing to do that as part of this kind of, oh, look over there's a policy you'll like to distract you from the party investigation. That's an odd one to choose, isn't it? You know, public health restrictions, public health measures that were brought in to keep people safe, and all of a sudden, well, let's throw them out to try and win back support.
Yes, well, I think it actually confirms a lot of people's suspicions that public health has just purely been a political issue, perhaps a control power issue. And I think rather than backing himself by saying, oh, don't worry, I'll lift these restrictions to make you happier, he's actually reaffirming what his opposition has been saying, that no, these restrictions aren't for the sake of our health, they don't work. And he's, as using them as a political tool, it's affirming that.
Do you think then that the strategies that we're talking about, and I hate to say their names again, I really truly do, but Operation Save Big Dog and Operation Red Meat. So Save Big Dog is apparently the plan for staff to be cleared out from Downing Street, whether that's special advisors or civil servants, but get them in the bin to try and save Boris Johnson's reputation. That's one idea, plus the policies that we've discussed. Are these strategies valid in the face of the Sue Gray investigation? We could get that report at some point this week. We understand the Prime Minister has been questioned by her now. When we take all of this in the round, Alys, where are we going to emerge on Friday?
When you say are these valid, I don't think that removing Downing Street staff to save a drinking culture is valid. I don't think people could really care less about what Downing Street staff could do. I think it's more that.
Well, fair to say, in normal times, do you think that's the distinction? What Downing Street staff do in normal times, but the fact they seem to have broken lockdown rules, is that not more of the issue here?
That's definitely the issue here.
Yeah.
I think that's led by example. I mean, there was a report that when Boris Johnson was supposed to be isolating, he found it ridiculous that he couldn't walk down the stairs next to someone in Downing Street, that he just didn't even consider following his own rules. So as I think that is completely coming from the top, whether you obey lockdown rules or not. And I think that the fact that the only person who has left the office is Allegra Stratton. He wasn't even at the Downing Street party that she was reported talking about. I think that's quite sad. But I think with the Sue Gray report you mentioned, all I'm saying is that I don't think people are going to be holding their breath for what she has to say. I think, as I said earlier, the people have heard enough and they've made up their mind regardless of the outcome. And I don't think that the use of attacking the Downing Street drinking culture is a viable deflection strategy. Of course, I don't think that having a culture of drinking in the office every Friday night is necessarily good, but that's a sort of workplace thing. You usually go out for drinks on a Friday. I just think he's slightly missing the mark. He seems to be missing an open goal where either he thinking about his leadership or the Conservative Party reputation in the next coming years.
I suppose one other thing that's becoming apparent this Monday is the trips to constituencies, the return to constituencies that Conservative MPs faced over the weekend to be met with inboxes that are jam-packed full of constituents that are not happy about the party situation. And so I just wonder, with the Prime Minister's future in the balance here, is it any clearer this Monday morning as to what that future is? There was one suggestion that Conservative MPs might be keen to leave him in office to kind of act as a bit of a sponge, as it were, to soak up things like the cost of living crisis, a potentially catastrophic local election run in May. Keep Boris Johnson to take all the rubbish and then get rid of him at some point further down the line. When will the culmination of all of this be, do you think?
I suppose time will tell with that. I do agree with the sort of sponge theory that you propose. That sort of shown there's no prominent member of his cabinet who is offering a viable alternative for leadership. People had their sort of hearts behind Liz Truss, but she, spoke out in full support against the Prime Minister during Partygate. I imagine, I would say by the end of maybe even 2022, as perhaps we're preparing for the next general election, there might be possibly a change of leadership, but I wouldn't really see a reason to. I don't think Boris Johnson is the kind of Prime Minister who would want to leave office surrounded in crisis. And I think these names, Operation Big Dog, Operation Red Meat, using the military for the migrant, that's a very kind of Churchill, national spirit, very Boris names. And it just evokes that he's back kind of behavior, I think. I don't think if Boris Johnson was the kind of Prime Minister to resign in scandal, he would have resigned at the first sign of these leaks about Downing Street parties, and I don't think that he will be leaving anytime soon.
I just want to reflect one other story with you as well this morning, quite an interesting one. This is from Oxfam. The pandemic has made the world's wealthiest far richer and has led to more people living in poverty, which I suppose we would have expected, but the kind of stark contrast is that the world's 10 richest men have more than doubled their collective fortune since March 2020, which I just think is notable to sort of look at that contrast, which was already that gulf, which was already very apparent, but has got dramatically bigger. The wealth of people like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, etc., etc. Their wealth grew from the collective wealth grew from $700 billion to $1.5 trillion.
Yeah, I mean, that's just a huge, vast amount of money that you can't really even have a concept of in everyday life. I think it's not only the money they have, but it's the control they have. I mean, even my part of London, I've been seeing local food shops get shut down and replaced with Amazon fresh food shops. I don't know if you've seen those, but it's scary and it's sad as well. I mean, according to the report, 160 million people have been pushed into poverty. Income for 99% of the population fell. I think numerous factors, hangover from neoliberalism, obviously, less tourism, lockdowns, eviction, or that these people possibly could be chronically ill, be that from long COVID, they can't do as much work as they could before, or that missed cancer diagnoses. I think this will probably bring back to the debate as to whether there should be measures to remedy the wealth gap with global tax initiatives. But I really think what matters is that the global initiatives we have, such as the World Economic Forum, they focus on nations recovering economically after the pandemic. That you can't deny the wealth gap is incredibly concerning. But I think time will tell this. You have to make sure you have to end the culture of endless restrictions and lockdowns now, especially with jabs and Omicron being a weaker variant. That this is the opportunity that nations have to economically recover and, boost the living quality for their average population.
And that in the face of the cost of living crisis as well. Alys, thank you very much. Lovely to speak to you this morning. Thank you.
Thank
That's
you.
Alys Watson Brown, political commentator and contributor to Young Voices UK.